Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining my session on conversation-driven development. I'm Alan. I'm one of the co-founders and I'm the CTO at a company called Rasa. What we do at Rasa, just very, very quickly before we get into it, we're building the standard infrastructure for conversational AI so that if you're adding conversational AI to your stack, that there's kind of only one obvious choice, and that's Rasa. And the way we're achieving that is by building open source tools. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining my session on conversation-driven development. My name is Alan. I'm one of the co-founders and I'm the CTO of a company called Rasa. And just very quickly, 2 words about what Rasa is. Rasa is a company, and our mission is to empower all makers to build AI assistants that work for everyone. And to do that, we're building the standard infrastructure for conversational AI. So to build that infrastructure and to achieve that mission, we do 3 things. We build open source tools. If you want to be the standard, you better be open source. We invest very heavily in our community of folks who are helping each other out, trying to build better AI assistants all the time. And we invest a lot in applied research. We have a large research team. We collaborate with universities, and different research groups also use our software and add to it. We have a huge community. We've got millions of downloads. We've got users in every continent. We've got user groups, community organized meetups and things in countries and in cities all over the world. We've got developers in all sorts of companies and different industries using Rasa to build mission-critical conversational AI. So I want to talk about an idea called conversation-driven development, and it captures a lot of the things that we've learned as a Rasa community, and I think generally as a community of people building conversational AI, and trying to distill some of those lessons into a very compact framework. And I think the reason why we'd like something like this is that there's some things that we know as a community of people who've been working in this for a while. So if you've built conversational AI before, you know that it's very hard. And you know that prototyping something is easy, but going from a prototype to something you're really comfortable putting on your website or putting in front of a lot of users is a very hard process. And there are lots of things that go wrong on the way. And there are lots of things that are different in building conversational software than in any other kinds of application. And there's some things which are the same. And CDD helps us distinguish those 2 types of things. So ideally, what I'd like for CDD to do is to help all of us think about how to build better conversational AI and have a set of principles that guide us in doing that, and also to save newcomers from having to learn this the hard way, because I see developers coming into this space all the time who have never built conversational AI before, and how do we make sure that they have a head start compared to where we were when we were all starting out in this space? So there are 6 actions that make up conversation-driven development, and I'll talk about each one. Giving them short names so that they're easy to remember, and hopefully they're all kind of obvious. So they're prototype, read, annotate, test, track, and fix. So I'll go through each one of those and just talk about what it means and why it's so important. The first one is prototype. And prototyping is more important for conversational AI than for any other kind of application. It's just impossible to anticipate all the things that people might say, right? It's such a free medium that people can say anything, and you cannot possibly be prepared for all of that. And there's really no shortcut. The only way to build a good conversational assistant is to build a bad one and give it to people to test. It doesn't matter if people are always going to break it, so you might as well do it early. So we really advocate for, as early as possible, when you have the most basic things working, get your first testers in. They will always surprise you, and they will always say things you hadn't anticipated. And then the next part of that is to read. And again, it sounds obvious, but at every stage of the project, it doesn't matter if you're just building the prototype or you're already in production for a while, it's always worth reading what users are saying to your assistant. It's really easy to get caught up, and I see a lot of teams get caught up in looking at metrics right away. How many users are expressing this intent? How many users are doing this and that? That's a reflex that we've built up because when we're building mobile apps and web apps, that's often the only data that we have, right? But what we have when we're building conversational assistants is we have exactly what the user is thinking. They're telling us in their own words. These conversations are incredibly rich with data, and people are telling you what their expectations are. And so it's always worth looking at that and getting that subjective insight of where are things going wrong? What are users looking for? Where am I getting away with something not being quite clear, but the user's working around it? Always, always, always look at conversations. And third one is annotate. When those conversations come in, use them to create your training data, right? Your model will be making predictions about the intent and the entities, correct those when they're wrong, and build up your training set that way from real conversations. Again, I see too many software engineers thinking that, oh, they can get away with not doing that. They can just use a script or a paraphrasing model or something like that and just synthetically generate a whole bunch of training data for all these different intents, and that's going to work. It doesn't. It just doesn't work. Again, there's no shortcut. Give your assistant to people. I mean, it's a perfectly good way to bootstrap, to come up with 10 different phrases for each intent yourself and some entities. That's a good way to get started. But if you're getting ready for production, the vast, vast, vast majority, like over 90% of your training data should be real messages from testers that you've annotated, as opposed to generated data that you synthesized somehow. Testing is just as important as in any other kind of software. And just because you're building something that has a machine learning component doesn't mean you should give up all your good practices. Professional teams do not ship important applications without tests. That's just not how people do things. And conversational AI is no different. And one of the most powerful things we have as tests are whole end-to-end conversations. Sequence of messages. Does the system respond correctly in each and every case? So taking whole conversations and using them as end-to-end tests and running those tests on a CI server, so that with every pull request, every commit, you're running through those tests and making sure you're not breaking things. This is good practice, and you should make sure that you do it. And if you're using a tool to build conversational AI and it doesn't support creating tests, it doesn't support running tests, then what you have is a prototyping tool, and it's not fit for production. Tracking is also important. So I advocate for using proxy measures to track which conversations are successful and which ones failed. It's impossible really to come up with a rigorous definition that exactly says all of these are successful and all of these are failed. They're always kind of in between cases. It doesn't matter so much. Don't worry about getting it perfect. Just measure something. And usually this is something that happens externally and isn't necessarily something you can see in the conversation itself. So if you convert a user to actually signing up for something, or the user has their issue resolved and they don't get back in touch with customer support within, let's say, 24 hours, those are important external signals. So push that data back in, combine that data with your conversations, and track how many people you're really helping. It's not enough to say, oh, my NLU classifier accuracy went from 80 to 82%, or 80 to 82 F1 or something. It's not enough. Right? That's an internal metric. What you want to measure is, are you helping people? Are you helping people, and more of them over time? And lastly, fixed. There's no getting away from it. It will always happen. Your conversational AI will always break down at some point for some number of conversations, right? Users will always find new edge cases and new ways to surprise you. So study those things. When you're looking through conversations and you see conversations which went well, great. Turn them into new tests, right? If something went well, make sure it always goes well from now on. Add a new test for it. If something went wrong, maybe you need some more training data for that. Maybe you need to rethink how you define this intent. Maybe you need to rethink the logic of your conversation. Maybe you need to change the wording of how your bot responds because it's confusing. Maybe you have an API call that threw an error or something like that, all sorts of things. But go and fix those things, and over time, find more and more failure cases and kind of knock each one of them out over time, and you'll see your proxy measures for success go up. So I want to talk a little bit about conversation-driven development in practice and some of the sort of important lessons to think about. So the first thing to say is that CDD is a set of 6 actions, and it's not a 6-step linear process. So you'll find yourself jumping between all of these all the time, and that's great and that's fine. And of course, when you add new functionality to an assistant, you're again in prototyping mode. You again need new test users because you don't have a lot of training data for the new functionality. And so you'll kind of constantly be iterating through this process. The second piece is that doing all of these actions requires a mix of skills. Some are development skills or data science skills. Some are more product manager skills or design skills, right? And it really takes a mix of different things. I don't believe that you can build conversational AI, with only software engineering skills or with only design skills, and you don't need any engineers or something like that. It takes a mix, it takes a team. And I want to show just a couple of screen grabs of how we've implemented conversation-driven development in a product called BrowserX. So just very briefly, to be clear about what I'm talking about, we have 2 products, Rasa Open Source and BrowserX. Rasa Open Source is a framework for building AI assistants, and BrowserX is something that sits on top. You use it together with the open source framework, and it helps you use conversation-driven development for Rasa assistants. So I'll just show a couple of examples of how we've implemented it and how we think about empowering teams to do CDD. The first is on the prototyping part. So what we heard a lot is that it's sometimes tricky to get test users to try out the early versions of your prototype. And it's not always easy to ask your colleagues to use their Facebook account to go talk to some assistant you've built, or to get permission to install an app on your company Slack or something like that. And so within BrowserX, as soon as you have something running, you can just grab a link and you can share it with people, and they'll get this little pop-up window, just a simple web view where they can chat to your assistant, and all of those conversations will show up in BrowserX and help you collect your first bits of training data. And so that leads to the conversation screen. This is the first thing you see when you come into BrowserX. We put those conversations front and center. Look at them, please look at them. It's just to remind you to read them and look at what people are telling you. It's really, really worth looking at. And we have all these filters. You can drill down by, conversations which have lower confidence, or are particularly long or particularly short, or where particular intents were, predicted, etc. And then we give you the NLU inbox, which is for the annotation, right? So all the messages which are coming in, you're getting them along with the predictions of what the intent probably was and what entities were detected. And you can either mark those as correct, add them to your training data, or you can fix whatever went wrong, whatever the NLU system made a mistake. And now, importantly, within BrowserX, all of those annotations that you do, they go back into Git. So from BrowserX, you do a bunch of annotation, you can push them to Git, either to master or preferably to a new branch. And from there, you create a pull request, and then your CI server can do its thing. So I've got a screen grab here from a project I have on GitHub called CarbonBot, and I use a GitHub action. I mean, you could use a Jenkins server or Travis CI or whatever you like. And what it does, it trains a model with my latest data. It runs through all my test stories, make sure that I haven't broken anything. It does a cross-validation of my NLU model, and then posts those results as a comment on the pull request. And so I can see both for the intent and for the entities, I can see which intents are performing well, what's my overall F1, which things are confused with each other, which entities are not getting picked up. And then helps me decide, and do a bit of code review and say, well, am I happy with these changes? Are they improving my system, or are they making it worse, right? And all these kind of good software engineering practices that we have around code review, continuous integration and deployment, we can build all of that in because BrowserX integrates with Git and uses that as its versioning. We give users a bunch of ways to tag conversations. So when you're looking at conversations, you can either manually add tags because you've noticed something that you want to keep track of, or you can do it programmatically via the API. So, you know, if something happens in your app elsewhere as a result of that conversation, then you can go and tag that conversation via the API. That's what I do with CarbonBot. If people get to the end and they get I send them a link. If they click on the link, then that calls the API, and that lets me know that I kind of converted this user. I got them to the end of the conversation. I got them clicking the link. And so I can use that as a proxy measure to understand how many of these conversations are going well. And that helps me sort of know that when I'm investing in improving the NLU model and all sorts of other things, that that's actually giving me something over time. And then, you know, we just have a single button for any conversation that went well. You can save it as a test. And those tests also go into Git. So again, it will go into Git, you create a PR, and you'll check that that test actually passes. And you'll know that, you know, any changes you make in the future won't prevent that conversation from still going correctly if it happens again. A few more resources just in case you're interested. Firstly, if you're looking for some inspiration for your next AI assistant, check out rasa.com/showcase. Lots of things there. Some of them are open source. Some of them are just a bit of fun. Some of them are serious, big commercial projects. So whatever you're interested in. And if you're just getting started with Rasa, I can highly recommend the Rasa Masterclass, 12 video series on YouTube, all the way from the start to deploying an assistant in production. And we're organizing a free online event on June 18th called L3AI. The URL is l3-ai.dev. We have a lot of really great speakers, and it's for the community of people building better AI assistants. So come join me there. And finally, as a recap, CDD is just about giving ourselves a language to talk about the lessons that we've been learning as a community. Conversational AI is hard, and CDD helps us articulate the ways that it's hard and the ways that it's different from other kinds of software. And I think we owe it to all the newcomers who come into the field to give them a shortcut to help them, you know, avoid those mistakes and not have to learn everything for themselves, and kind of use these lessons. I think that's the only way that, you know, the next generation can go further than we have, and we can keep making progress as a field to build better conversational AI. So thanks very much for listening. I look forward to joining everyone in the Q&A session afterwards. And if you have thoughts, you agree, disagree, whatever, shoot me an email. It's easy to guess, but I've got it on the screen anyway. So look forward to chatting to all of you later. Thank you.